All right, so what we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about space and how to use space in your web page to, or your website to increase communication with your site visitors. One of the first things that you want to work for and strive for is consistency. Consistency is really important across web pages. As you can look here, these are a variety of Google pages, and at the top of every page we see here, we have the exact same search bar and we have the exact same user content information. And so anytime a person who's even remotely familiar with this consistent pattern ends up at a Google page with this consistent pattern on it, they know what to do. They're comfortable with the environment, they know how to navigate. And so you want to keep the same true in all of your web pages. Any web page that you have within a site, you want to build this consistency in. And this consistency is going to make the process, the process of navigation much easier for your user. All right, the next thing that we want to talk about is developing a grid-like layout to your pages. If you look here again, Google is known for having very clean, crisp, well-defined layout that's easy to navigate. That's kind of what they've always done. You know, they've taken historically they've taken all these web pages and all this information on the internet and they've condensed it into a form that's viewable. You can look at it and you can digest it as a user. And so here, this is an illustration of the grid format. You can even see they even use a grid for an icon, and then everything fits within that grid. And if you have more items that you need to get, you'd hit more, and when you hit more, you'd encounter yet another grid. Is for those of you who use smartphones on a regular basis, you're well aware that the grid format is obviously very common on mobile devices, very common on pretty much any touchscreen device we use is built on the grid. So think about how you can incorporate the grid into your design. Think about how your text can fit into grid units also. For example, if we look at the senior um, web page that we were using earlier to talk about font sizing, you can look here and you can see that all of this content is placed into a grid. And by placing it into a grid, there's a fair amount of room for text and the text conversation without overwhelming a viewer as to what's actually on that page. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is kind of active space. And active space is not necessarily space that's busy, but it's active space as a user. Um, Active space equals, again, usability. So you want to take a look at that space and see, is this space usable? Meaning, when I look at it, can I make quick sense of it? And so here you can see, obviously this is for whatever conversation is going on. These are buttons that allow us to add things to that conversation: videos, photos, links, an event. And then over here, you have the address bar, clearly identifiable, and then some of your command controls down here. We also have a few little items over there. Then we have nice, clear links up here as to how we can manipulate this particular box. And so as you can see here, would be considered a very successful active environment. We can do a lot here. There's a whole lot of things that we can accomplish, but it's not busy. We're not overwhelmed. We're not inundated with too much stuff. And so think about, again, on the websites that you're working with, how do you want your content to deliver the message? You don't want the content to be so crammed together. I mean, if you have a web page and every single solitary space on that web page is just packed full of text, that's not going to be a very readable or very usable text for your audience members. But let's say we take it and we have a nice title at the top, some nice big bold letters. We have some kind of key items over here. And then we have a nice, fairly clean box that we keep our text confined to. And then let's say maybe we've got a couple of social media buttons up there, something like that. That's a text, that's a website that we can use. And so think about, again, active space. This is active space. There's room for us to do things in here. Up here, there might be a lot going on, but I wouldn't call it active. Okay, the next thing that I want to spend some time talking about, that I'll just use this page for, is kind of fonts and how you want to organize your fonts. Typically speaking, if you have a web page, you want to avoid the center font and then having your text below it. Layout just ends up coming out a little wacky. In most cases, you're going to want to take a page and you're going to want to, generally speaking, you're going to want to right align most of your text. Now, not in all cases, but in most cases, you're going to want to right align. Sometimes you will have some things that are left aligned as long as their sizing is fairly consistent. In terms of when I say sizing, I mean length. You don't want to have a really long word with a really short word above it that were right aligned. I'm sorry, this should be left aligned. Just you guys probably picked up on that, but left aligned versus right aligned. The next thing that we want to talk about and we want to look at are headings and floating headings. So you all right now are in our D2L course site, and when you're in the D2L course site, you'll probably notice if you look that I have a link to a video, a daily video, an external link, and then I put in the video. And then what I end up doing is I put in down here, I put in one extra space, sometimes even two, depending on what's called for. One extra space before I put the link for the next video, and then I don't usually put a space in between the link and the following video. Now the reason for that is because if you end up in a different scenario, let's erase this one, and you end up in a scenario where you have your page and you have a link or some kind of header, and then you immediately have some kind of content, whether it be video or picture or text, whatever, and then you immediately, with the same kind of spacing, you have another header or another link and another piece of content, it starts to get confusing to your audience members. They're going to start going around wondering, hey, is this text or link go with this material, or does that text and link go with that material? And you're going to start to confuse them. So the graphical layout, this all goes back to kind of the graphics and what your page looks like in terms of the structure, is that you want to create highly usable, highly readable, clear pages that when somebody sits down and they look at your page, they know exactly what's going on. You've developed some kind of grid. You have consistent structure through all your pages, and you have content where it's highly usable in very active areas. So think about your page design, think about it carefully. This is going to be something as a content writer, if you want to be involved in, you're going to have to work with your developers firsthand. And getting back to the original premise of this book, this is why it's important not to just go through and Greek your layout or Greek your text. As a content writer, you are in charge of the conversation. And so you need to be responsible for helping create spaces where a conversation can occur.